Kwani lecturer kujiba. Na watu mko wapi kwa? Ama mimi peke yangu ndio niko kwa Zoom? Watu ongeeni. Mimi sijaona mtu huko hivi. Kwani mimi peke yangu ndio nataka kusoma? Kama hakuna lesson watu. Mbona wanatuma?
Wako. Wewe si utulie ma, nini mbaya?
Wewe mzee,
Sijaona.
Vipi?
Nataka muongee acheni ujinga.
Si uangalie tu participant na utulie. Wewe unasumbua nini?
Sasa watu wanaitazama peke yao na mmenyamaza kama maji yangu.
unataka kutugombanisha.
Tulia msee. Toa kerere yako hapo kwa Zoom.
Wewe ni mtu wa YouTube.
Mwambie mama.
Wewe unaambia aje mzee?
Hata waje ni unmute mbao zetu.
Unaambia aje mzee?
Wewe mwambie watu wenye hawajajoin wa join class.
Kuhangaika, si mtu ashare movie tu wote.
Wewe wachana mambo ya movie. Ambia watu wa join class.
Bana waambia watu.
Huko kwa
Wachana
nyumba
mambo ya
yako
movie.
unataka
Movie utaoji baadaye.
Watu wako wewe.
toka na hangover za weekend utaka join class.
Guzman.
Rada.
Guzman. Ukoje?
Rada. Niko fit.
Ukoje?
Niko poa.
Oh.
لك لا يوكا مرات.
Hello, good morning. Is there anyone from Model who could help us mute everybody so we get started?
Tuombe kwanza.
Can I help, sir? To mute all of this.
Are you the host? There is a way Model team does it so that all of you are muted. Then they will begin unmuting you when you have a question. If you can. Okay. How many are we? 291, 292. The numbers are increasing. Possibly the mistake I made, I sent so many of the notes ahead. So that is okay. So we can proceed. I think today we'll look at, yeah. We had looked quite looked at most of the things about HIV. So what I want us to look at today, we are beginning with the KUC1230 notes 4, okay, where we are looking at the causes of disparity between the levels of infection between men and women as far as HIV is concerned, because the understanding we have is that almost all the time you'll have more ladies being infected compared to their male counterparts. Okay, so we need to have an understanding of why that is the case. Okay, so most of our focus might be Kenya, but the reasons and the factors that cause that are cross-cutting. So they are likely to be found in many other places. Okay, they are likely to be found in many other places. So there is a disparity between the rates of infection of HIV, AIDS, and even most other STIs between men and women. So when you compare the men and women in a particular age group, in a particular socioeconomic background, then you will realize that there is a significant higher number of men having HIV, having STIs compared to the number of males will have it at a lower rate, females will have it at a higher infection rate. So the main reasons we can attribute this difference, what we call the gender-based difference in the infection rates, to various factors. Some of them are biological, some are social, others are economic and cultural. Okay, so we'll begin looking at the causes of these disparities, and one of them is, let me make this bigger. The first group of factors are the biological factors. So one thing that we've got to understand is whenever sex is happening, it happens inside a woman. Okay, sex happens inside a woman. And by virtue of that, then it means the woman gets to be more exposed to any pathogen that possibly is available during the intercourse. Because the surface area of the woman's body compared to the surface area of the man, the surface area of the woman's body that's exposed to the virus is bigger. In the event that there are no protections being used, and then ejaculation will happen and all the semen will be released into the woman again. Okay. So by virtue of that exposure, by virtue of the high surface area that is more exposed, then the woman stands a higher chance of being infected compared to the man. Okay, of being infected compared to the man. Another thing that causes that disparity is how ready people are for the intercourse. Okay, for the woman, before you avoid a lot of the tears, then she has to be lubricated. But for most men, so long as they get an erection, then they are ready for sex. Okay, so that disparity, because the woman is taking a longer period for her body system to be ready for intercourse without possible tears. Okay, but now at times it does not measure. Okay, at times it does not measure in equivalent. Just a minute, someone walked in the office, let me talk to him, then I come back. 1 minute. Okay, sorry for that. So the other thing is that there are periods, times when women are more vulnerable, especially during their menstruation. So at that time, the cervix, because what happens before menstruation, a woman upon attaining reproductive maturity becomes ready for pregnancy every month. That's why they ovulate. So upon ovulation, then now the lining, the uterus, okay, the lining of the uterus becomes ready for implantation. So it becomes thicker. So after it becomes thicker, then it happens that no fertilization happens, then the thick lining of the uterus will now have to peel and come out as menses. So during that time, when it is coming out as menses, that's now what we call the menstruation flow of ladies. The cervix at that time is more prone to infection. Okay, the cervix at that time is more prone to infection. So that is also a biological factor that will make women to be more prone to HIV or any other STI. Because if it happens that now they can engage in an unprotected coitus, then there is a higher chance that actually the lady can get infected. The other bit is the socio-economic disparity. So in this, we look at the levels of poverty and how people depend on each other. In Kenya, we have what we call a patrilineal society. I think there are just 2 or 3 populations that are not patrilineal. With patrilineal, inamaanisha mtoto ni wa baba. So mtoto anakuwa wa baba sababu from most of our cultures, only the Kikuyus, I think, and should be the Mijikendas in the coast, are the ones who are matrilineal. Kwa wao mtoto ni wa mama. But when kids belong to the father, it is just because even property within the society is inherited, is given to boys or to men within the family. If your father, culturally, if your father had a piece of land and they are dividing it, they'll give it to men, their sons. So what that means, it ends up then giving men an unfair advantage so that they have something that they can rely on from an economic perspective. But your sister will not be having any piece of land. Instead, now she has to go and rely on her husband. Okay? So it means then most women now face what we call the economic dependency. Economically, they depend on men. So when you are economically depending on a man, then it reduces, it limits your ability to negotiate for safe sex. So it is the man who is providing that will be dictating when and possibly where to have sex. But because the woman is just relying on this man for provision, then she has a lower ability to say no. Okay. Then we have, for example, the women who are in a lower socioeconomic bracket. Some of these beautiful girls we see around the university, unapata wale wako na watu wanaitwa wababa. Okay. Mnasema ati niko na mbabas. So if you have one of those mbabas, you are in that relationship most likely not for love. Even men, our vijana pia wako na sugar mummies. Okay. So when you are in such a relationship, you are not there for love. You are there for some gain. Maybe that person is giving you money. That person is financing your lifestyle. So it means then, because of your dependence on that person, when that person wants sex, it is difficult for you to say, tutafute CD kwanza, ama tutafute kitu fulani kwanza, because you are getting into this relationship from a lower economic bracket. So you feel that this person is helping you too much, that you might not be able to say no. Okay. Another factor is the level of educational disparity. So in most places, you'll find that, especially in the rural areas, the people who are less informed about most things are women. Even when you do just a quick assessment, and I know I've got a daughter to my cousin, she called me yesterday, so she's in class. So she was asking me if I'm the one who says what I say. I said, yes, mom, I'm the one. So, sio kwa ubaya mama, acha tusome, tukiendelea mbele. Tukikutana nyumbani, mimi ni baba yako. Shuleni, mimi ni mwalimu wako. So, when you go to most of these rural areas, and even just compare, ask around people who have phones, you realize most men have phones and women don't. You go in for the type of phones, the ones that can help you access, for example, internet. Most people who have smartphones are actually men, and women will not have phones or will not have smartphones compared to their male counterparts. Currently, the easiest way for people to access information is through the phone, through social media. So by not being able to access most of this information, then women become less informed about prevention mechanisms, about testing, where it is done, about modes of treatment. Okay, and that then disadvantages them because they are less informed, so they are not in a position to initiate preventive measures, to even go for testing, or possibly even look for treatment. Okay. Then the cultural and gender norms. So we have gender roles that are deeply ingrained in most parts of this country. And you find that in most cases, women are there to please men. Okay. If you are a woman and you're getting married, you are told, ile kazi umeenda kufanya kwa bwana yako ni hii. Okay. So you come into a relationship with a gender inequality already. As a woman, you are playing subordinate to the man. So which means whatever the man wants, as a woman, you have to give in. So they end up now having very little power to negotiate and negotiate for safe sex. So in that case, then, they will lack the ability now to stop themselves from being exposed to the risk of HIV infection. The other bit is the cultural norm where polygamy, or the idea of having multiple sexual partners. So we have polygamous marriages where you have one man married to several women. That will likely increase the possibilities of HIV transmission, because when this man is moving from one woman to the other, from one of his wives to the other, hawapimi. Ukitoka leo kwa Ann, kesho unaenda kwa Dorcas, utafika kwa Dorcas asema wacha tupime HIV ndio tufanye hii maneno. Okay? So with such, it is one man against many women. Okay? So there is no way these women may end up negotiating for any safe sex. Okay? So they cannot insist that tupimane kwanza, umetoka kwa huyu umekuja kwangu. Okay? So culturally, that one also makes women to be at a higher risk. We have what we call the health-seeking behavior. Okay, so it is possible that we could even be having a higher HIV among men, but only that men don't go for tests. For women, ukikuwa na mimba lazima upimwe. So kuna wanaume wengi wenye hawapimwi, wanapimwanga kupitia kwa bibi zao. When the wife is pregnant, apimwe, ndio wewe mwanaume pia ajue kuko namna gani. Okay? So it is possible also that just because of the health seeking behavior ya wanaume, kuna uwezekano kwamba wengi wao pia wako na ugonjwa lakini haijulikani. Okay, lakini haijulikani. Then there is this aspect of infidelity and the high risk sexual behavior. Most of the men who are listening to me in the university, they are no boys. So most of the men students who are listening to me will agree with me that men will boast so much of possibly wamelala na wasichana wangapi, you know. So for a long time, that has been making men to have a higher risky sexual behavior. Okay, so it makes them that the many women you've slept with, then the more of a man you actually appear to be. They could brag and tell you how over the weekend, recently, actually it was on Thursday last week, I was in one of the kinyozis around Kibabi. I will not tell you which one. So mwenye alikuwa ananinyoa, rafiki yake akaingia, just young guys. So huyo rafiki yake, he has contracted an STI. So he was telling this guy that I'm having these signs. Then the guy was sharing me, akamuuliza na ni nani, ni msichana mgani? Akaniambia, akamujibu from for 1 week, that was on Thursday. So for the last close to 3-4 days, huyo jamaa mwenye akona STI amekuwa na wasichana 5. That one happened on Thursday. Jioni nilikuwa nimeenda kunyoa. Wasichana 5 within a week. So hata hajui kwa hao 5 ni mgani amempatia STI. Okay? So even my worry was not that he has it. My worry was kwa hao wasichana, if kama ni wa kwanza ndiye alimpatia, then it means 4 others wamepata the STI. You know, so you look at such, the level of sexual risk that people expose themselves to, okay, because of some level of infidelity, some level of heroism, than when you go with many women, then you are really wewe ni jogo. But now at the end of it, you end up just exposing yourself to such risks. Okay, you end up exposing yourself to such risks. So men are thought actually to most likely be the primary HIV transmitters. Because think, this guy that I've told you, mwenye amekuwa na wasichana 5 within 4 days, if he got the infection, and God forbid, if it was HIV, for example, it will be 1 man infecting how many? Possibly alipata kwa msichana mmoja, but amepea wasichana wengine 4. Okay, so it means then the man is now a primary HIV transmitter. So okay. So the need to check on our sexual appetite and possibly control it. Another thing that leads to such is the HIV or the AIDS stigma. So most of this sadly affects women, the stigma and the discrimination. Okay, so if there is a woman who is living, for example, with HIV, many people will think that huyo mwanamke alienda nje ya ndoa ndiye akapata. It's very few will want to blame the husband instead, just like most people do when they are thinking about fertility. Wasipozaa ni mwanamke, wasipofanya nini ni mwanamke. Okay. So if the stigma, the level of stigma imekuwa juu sana, then it will make some of these women less likely to go out and seek help. They will not want to go to hospital, because if they test wapate uko na ugonjwa, then fulani atajua na itaanza kuleta shida. So that stigma, that discrimination that comes with the realization that a particular person is HIV positive, it ends up affecting women because, one, most of them don't own property. So if your husband tells you toka kwangu uko na ugonjwa, so most of them feel like nitaenda wapi. Okay, so that delay is what now makes the delay to go seeking for help. It will now make the disease to progress. Okay, unlike if they had gone way ahead, it will have led to the initiation of the ARV. Then the progression of the disease will not have gone to the next level. Then there is the fear of disclosure, where because the woman feels that I'll be ostracized, maybe by the family, by the husband. Most of them now will not want to disclose their HIV status. Okay. I was talking to another guy, anatoka hapa Kandui. Akona ndugu yake, where the wife alikataa for a long time. The wife alienda kwao kidogo, then when she came back, she declined getting intimate with this guy. Akataa kabisa, jamaa kijaribu, mwanamke anakataa. So then the woman was pregnant. Ile ilifika wakati ya kwenda clinic, wakapigia bwana simu. only for the man to realize this woman is HIV positive. Okay, the woman is HIV positive. But she had not disclosed to the man. Why? Because she feared that if I told my husband I'm HIV positive, nitafukuzwa hapa. No. So such, because most men will, yeye hata akijua ako na HIV ako kwake ama ako kwao, shamba ni yao ama shamba ni yake. But now it's the woman who is looked at as sort of being hayuko kwao. No. So they feel like if I disclose my status, what if I'm told to leave? Okay. So that lack of openness is now what will compromise the ability of these women to receive proper care, to receive support, and even the therapy. All that will lead to an exacerbation or the increase in the associated health risks. In some areas also, we have limited access to health services among women, especially in the marginalized communities. So you think of some places in this country where there is not even a hospital, okay? The people who always remain at home are women. Men will go to towns, kwenda kutafuta kibarua ama kufanya kitu yote huko. While in town, they will have access to most of these services. But the women who are left back deep in the villages, they're the ones now who will have very limited access to some of these health services, HIV testing and treatment included. Okay. So with the lack of access, the barriers could either be a geographical distance or the cultural stigma or just the lack of transport. Okay. So you are in a place where the distance from where you are to where they offer HIV services is possibly 200 kilometers. And there is no proper mode of transport. You cannot spend 1,000 shillings, which you most likely you even don't have, just to go and access the HIV services. But men, their husbands will have gone to those urban centers kutafuta kibarua. So while there, they can easily access those services. Okay. Still, in the limited access, there are areas that have inadequate maternal health services. Okay. So that even during pregnancy, during childbirth, there is no access to services for you to continue enjoying the HIV test, the HIV support, and the HIV treatment. So which means still in that state, you can either be infected if you are getting intimate with your husband, infect the child if you are breastfeeding, okay? Or during pregnancy, you can infect your child if you've not been tested. Then the sexual violence, the gender-based violence in Kenya. Currently, we have women who are also beating up men, but for a long time, it's been women who bear the biggest brunt of it. Okay. So if there is a woman who is subjected to sexual violence, then it means within that particular act of violence, there is no way that that woman can insist of using any protection. Okay. Because possibly it is rape, it is an assault. During rape, you cannot say anything. Kwamba tumia condom ama fanya namna gani. So in such cases, the woman will become more vulnerable because she's now at the mercy of whoever is subjecting her to the violence. Okay. Some of these sexual violences within communities are linked to cultural practices. I went to a particular part of this country. I will not tell you where. I was doing sampling, I think for my PhD. So tukafika hapo, tukaanza kupiga story na the man of the home. He was around almost 80 years old. And the wife was around 75. But then we noticed there's just another young girl in the homestead. So when we asked the man told us that was his second wife. Barely around 15 years old. So we just got into stories. Then what happened was very interesting. The man told us that for a long time, this young lady had not allowed this man to sleep with her. So the previous night, it was the first wife who came and held the second wife by force so that the man can sleep with her. Okay. So you can imagine in such a case, did that second wife have any alternative to say, sasa basi mzee, let's use protection? Okay. So with such cases, with these issues of early and forced marriages, you have young girls who are married off at an early age and most likely will be to older men. What that means now, the young girl who's been married off very early on in life will begin engaging in sexual activity with a man whose status she doesn't know. So in the event that that man is positive, then the poor girl might end up also suffering. Okay. Then the limited male involvement, we talked about that men will not likely engage in most of the HIV testing. They wait for women to go. Okay. So it's possible that male might even be having a higher rate of infection, but it's only that they don't go and get tested. So the ladies go by virtue of pregnancy. Ukikuwa pregnant, at some point lazima utajipata umeenda wapi? Hospitali. Ukifika huko, watapima wewe mwanamke, ndio watasema uko nayo. Okay. The adolescent girls and young women, the AGYW, still, most of you first years, you might realize maybe you have girlfriends in high school or something like that who are younger than you. So what it means then, you end up the way we are wired. Even the Bible says, Mungu alitengeneza Adam kwanza, ndiye akatengeneza Eve. Meaning the man most of the time is older than the lady. That means that by virtue of that age disparity, then you likely have girls getting intimate with men who are older than them. So that reduces their ability to be firm enough and demand for protection. Okay. Then there is the aspect of migration. If you send people from here to Kisumu or to Mombasa, if you send 10 men and 10 ladies, chances are very high that ladies might come back without soliciting for sex kule wameenda, not unless watongozwe. But the men penye wanaenda tu wakifika hivi, I bet more than half, okay, more than half of the men will have sought women to sleep with. So by people who move, these mobile populations, you talk of the truck drivers, you remember during COVID, hao ndio walikuwa wanasambaza COVID. The same thing happens for HIV. Whenever there is a lot of mobility, when people move, sex is the oldest, among the oldest things that are as old as man. So whenever people move, they move with their sexual urge. The ones who are able to control will not be looking for whom to sleep with, but people who are not able will have a higher temptation to sleep with anybody. So if you are getting intimate with someone whose status you don't know, both of you have met at that particular place, then there is a higher risk of exposure to HIV. And in most of these cases, the women will be at a higher risk of exposure because it is the man who will lure you. Mwanaume ndiye atakwambia kuja tukule nyama, kumbe amepanga kwamba atalala na wewe hujajua. So you always come into such a relationship with at a higher risk level because the man has known what he's planning in his mind, lakini wewe nawe haujajua kwamba you are also on the menu. Okay, so those are the causes of the disparity. But we've talked about one thing which is very important, which is culture. Most of us come from populations that are associated with certain cultures. Okay, you talk of us, the Luyas and Bukusus, you talk of circumcision. The Luos, they have their own culture. The Kikuyus have theirs. So in terms of HIV, does our cultural beliefs in any way affect or impact how STDs are transmitted? Okay. Does it mean what we believe in, what we practice, can it in any way lead to either a higher transmission or a lower transmission for STDs? We say so because we all live in communities. Okay, we all live in communities, and how these communities lead their lives will most likely impact us. And when we are impacted, it affects how we end up carrying ourselves. And one of those things is the sexual interactions that come up after that. So culture just refers to the shared beliefs, the customs, the practices, the values, and the social behaviors within a community. What does a certain group of people believe in? What do they practice? That is the culture of that community. So these beliefs, they end up shaping how people perceive health, disease, and sexuality. There are communities when you go to them, ukikuwa mgonjwa, umerogwa, ama Mungu amekukasirikia, that is how they believe. So with such, then it means you cannot now go to seek treatment in hospital. Instead, they might take you to their traditional shrine to pray for you. Okay, so how communities, how individuals within a particular population understand what it means to be healthy, what it means to be sick, that one will end up shaping how the diseases, how the sickness within that community can be transmitted from one person to another. Okay. So these cultural norms will eventually influence how we adopt preventive measures. There are cultures that you cannot, culturally, condoms are not permitted. Okay. So it means then one prevention method less. So let's proceed and now try to look at the key cultural aspects. So the sexual roles and the gender norms. So in many communities, traditionally, gender roles will influence sexual behavior. Okay. So most communities look at men as being dominant in the sexual relationships. Most of you ladies, if you have a boyfriend, it is most of the time ni wewe unangoja akupigie simu akwambie kuja unitembelee. Okay, if you just picked your phone au text umwambie Johnny I'm coming, wataanza kusema hey, huyu mtu naye ako namna gani? Because the way culture, society has brought us up, it is men who are supposed to lead. It is men who are supposed to dominate in most of these sexual relationships. As a lady, hata ukiona mwanaume na useme huyu mwanaume ni mzuri, ningetapata ya kuwa boyfriend, you cannot approach that man. It is the man to approach you. Okay. So with such, it means then, as a woman, you are getting into a relationship already not as an equal. Then it makes you not to have enough standing or ability to negotiate how to even protect yourselves during sex. Okay. So that then, on the basis of culture looking at men as being dominant in sexual relationships, would make women to be more vulnerable, okay, to STDs. The second thing is polygamy. Okay, you have a man having more than one wife. That increases the risk of STD transmission. One of the main problems we have these days is marriage and sexual behavior. Even in church, we are told, wait till you're married before you play sex. Very good thing. But now, currently, even people in marriage are playing sex, but not just with their partner. Okay, so you have sex in marriage, but the sexual behavior is extramarital. People are going out. Okay, and this is highly common currently. And most of it is, you might begin these extramarital sexual affairs with protection, but you cannot, most often, you cannot carry on all through with the protections. There will be a point when you will stop. Sadly, there are some cultures that support that. Okay, there are some cultures that support that. Hapo ndio utaambiwa kama mwanamke, si bwana amerudi, shida yako ni nini? Wewe ngojea bwana wapi? Nyumbani. Okay, there's a story of a lady who was talking kwa matanga ya bwana yake. So when it was a time kuongea akasema, nimeshukuru Mungu sana, kuanzia leo ndio nitakuwa najua pali penye bwana yangu yuko, because now the man will be buried, awekwe hapo, so the woman will know every day kwamba bwana yangu ako wapi, ako hapo. So such a simple statement, but it just tells you how some cultures have led to some of these extramarital affairs. Okay, so the occurrence of this extramarital sexual activity, and the sad thing is that there are some cultures which will support, which will tell a woman to not follow what the man is doing, just wait for the man at home. Yet, as the man goes about doing whatever he's doing, when he comes back home, the same woman does not have an ability to bargain for safer sex. So that means the woman is now vulnerable. Okay, there are cultural beliefs and stigma concerning HIV, that when someone is infected, for example, in certain cultures, people feel ashamed, feel embarrassed even to go and test. Because when it is eventually discovered kwamba uko na HIV, then everybody will even run away from it. So for you to be safe within such a cultural setting is even don't go and get tested. And not being tested does not mean you don't have it. It just leads to a later realization that actually I have the disease. Okay. When you realize late, when you discover late that you are infected, we know the dangers, because you'll be likely now, your immune system will have been destroyed significantly by the HIV virus because you delayed to initiate the ART. Why did you delay? You didn't go for the test early. What made you not to go? Stigma, which is cultural. Okay. Then the aspect of traditional healing versus modern medicine. There are some rural areas when you go, you find people rely heavily on traditional medicine. Okay. But while we know that traditional medicine is of help, at times it is not specific. Okay. So it can't be targeting a particular disease-causing microorganism. It could not be targeting HIV, for example. So which means when you are infected with an STD, then you are using the traditional medicine, which is not specific to that STD. It will lead, haitakuwa inatibu hiyo ugonjwa uko nayo, lakini bado unatumia hiyo dawa ya kienyeji. But if you went to hospital, they will test, realize that maybe you have gonorrhea, you have syphilis, or you have HIV. Then they put you on a treatment that is specific. Okay, so it means for most of these people who prefer the traditional healing, they lead to a rise in the untreated STDs. So you are on medication, but the medication is not treating the STD. Okay. Then still with the traditional medicine, there are always a lot of stories that come. There are people who think HIV ni kurogwa. So if you are HIV infected, maybe there is a pastor who will pray for you. There are some churches who huwezi enda hospitalini kabisa. So you'll have to sit there and wait for the pastor who prays about certain diseases. So when you are now having such misinformation about STDs, there are some utaambiwa hiyo is not even a disease, it's just a misfortune. Okay. So if you have HIV and you are told it's a misfortune, that will not stop you from getting intimate with other people. And as you do that, there is the risk of transmission, which continues. Why is it happening? Because of our traditional knowledge, because of the over-reliance on the traditional healing. But how can culture influence prevention and treatment? In terms of prevention, there are some cultures which might not even allow condom use. There are some cultures zenye hawaruhusu. They think it's unnecessary. They think it's inappropriate. Because there are people who think that the semen, when it is held in a condom and discarded, umetupa watoto, culturally speaking. So in such cultures, then, the aspect of HIV prevention is discouraged. Okay. And even in some cultures, when you ask someone that when we are getting intimate, let's use a condom, they will think, the person you are asking will think either you are mistrusting that person, or you think huyo mtu ni malaya atakuambukiza ugonjwa. Yet, the thing is you don't know the status ya huyo mtu na yeye pia hajui your status. But based on their culture, ule mtu anatumia condom na yeye anamaanisha huyo mtu ni malaya. No. So when such happens, then such cultural beliefs will make it very difficult in the reduction of STD transmission. The concept of education. In some cultures, you cannot talk about sex and STDs openly. You can't. Okay. So the ideas of sex education, for example, it becomes so difficult that I think it's some of them, in Northeastern, the Muslim part of this country, some of these things cannot be openly talked about. Okay. So it is not that they don't want, but the culture prohibits. If that happens, then there will be a gap in knowledge. When in some other parts of the country, people are being told, people are being educated on how to practice safe sex. Then in some other countries, culture prohibits that. Then there is a gap. Wa huku wanajua na wa huku hawajui. So wale hawajui, transmission will be high, prevention will be very low. Okay. Then on the concept of treatment, in most cultures, because of the strong stigma that is attached to the STDs, HIV included, it will almost all the time lead to a delay in seeking treatment. Okay. You delay because you might not even have gone to be tested ahead. So if it is a woman, until upate mimba, ukienda kwa hospitali ndio watakupima wakwambie, na unajua uko na hii ugonjwa pia. Okay. So that means when there is a delay in the testing, it will just mean it increases the presence of an STD which is not treated. And when you leave an STD to be untreated for a long time, it can easily lead into a long-term health complications. For HIV, itaenda ingia sasa AIDS stage. Okay. Still in treatment, as we've talked about the traditional medicine, kuna wale wanaenda kutafuta hii kwa waganga wa kienyeji. Ile, maybe most of you are still too young. We had the cup in Loliondo, Tanzania, where people were flocking kwenda kupatiwa hiyo kikombe. Walikuwa imesemekana ukikunywa hiyo kikombe unapona ugonjwa yote, ikuwe HIV, ikuwe gani. Okay. But the reality is most people died. So people could discontinue their ARVs, waende wasimame kwa laini. Okay. People could queue even for a week ndio ufikie ukule penye hiyo kikombe iko ya the traditional medicine. Okay. So that just meant the aspect of culture, the aspect of using traditional medicine made it difficult for people to seek modern medical treatment for the STD. So the reliance on a modern medical treatment hindered the prevention and treatment of some STDs and even a cure for those that have a cure. Okay. So when you want to address the cultural impact on STDs, you have to promote sexual health education. Okay. So within wherever we come from, within our communities, let's promote sexual health education. Talk about how to practice safe sex. Okay. The specific needs, the beliefs, let's address them. Let's talk about the prevention, because at times prevention is better than cure. And the best thing is if we tailor this education to the local context. So ile lugha unaweza tumia hapa university, ukienda nyumbani you can now change it. Okay, because you realize that the audience has changed. Then we need to engage religious and community leaders. Okay, engage our pastors, engage chiefs, engage the nyumba kumis in most of these other communities, because those are the people who hold significant influence within the communities that we come from. Let us destigmatize STDs. So let's reduce the stigma surrounding STD, surrounding HIV. Because if we continue to stigmatize anybody who has HIV, anybody who has an STD, what we are doing, we threaten those people to go back into their cocoons. Na hao ndio sasa wataanza kukua transmitters. We should encourage them to come out so that they declare. Then once we know, it can now be dealt with. They can be given treatment, okay, so that they should not act now as transmitters, but let them be points from where genuine information can come from. Then we need to incorporate traditional healing practices within the current health programs. Okay. So if the relevant authorities can help support most of these traditional healers and help them kuambia kwamba mtu akikuja na akuwe na hii ugonjwa, refer them to us. Okay. So that will help to bridge that gap. The traditional healers should deal with what they can treat, and whatever they can't, let it be taken to the modern medical health centers, from where they can now be treated effectively. Okay. I'm looking at this. Okay, so there is no question here. So I will proceed now to the next. So the course is HIV/AIDS and other emerging health challenges. So which means we don't just look at HIV, but we look at HIV and any other challenge. In this case, we've looked at HIV, but we go to an area where we are looking at STDs in general, because sexually transmitted infections or diseases, they can be transmitted the same way HIV is. Okay. So if you expose yourself, huyo mtu anaweza kuwa hana HIV but akona gonorrhea ama akona any other STD. So what we were talking about in terms of prevention, in terms of the risks, applies across. So I wanted us now to change a bit and stop looking at the STDs, but now get into these other emerging health challenges. Okay, these other emerging health challenges. And one such is what you find in your notes 5. Okay. You could, if I asked all of us here from our villages, do you know of anyone who died of HIV? Maybe very few will say, because HIV, not many people come out, hata hawaandiki kwa program ama kwa life history kwamba alikuja akapata ukimwi then akakufa. But if I asked any one of us, if you know of someone who died of cancer from our communities, I'm sure so many of you will say, I know so and so. So we will look at, we'll just have an overview about cancer. Look at the risk factors and how to prevent. With treatment, it's not so much for you, because nyinyi bora mjue risk factors na ni kitu gani unaweza fanya ku prevent cancer. Treatment, wale wa nursing and nursing are not part of this group. They can bother about it. So cancer is a group of diseases which is characterized by the uncontrolled growth and spread of abnormal cells in the body. In biology, there's what we call contact inhibition. When cells are growing, zikishikana hivi, when they come in contact, that contact should inhibit the cell from continuing to grow. Okay. But what happens with cancer, the cell behaves ni kama hiyo cell imeharibika kichwa. So it grows even with the contact. So the aspect of contact inhibition in cancer is now lost. That's why it leads to the uncontrolled growth and spread of these abnormal cells. So in most cases, utaona mtu wa kwanza kunakuwa na growth, because hiyo growth, ile kufura, the lump, kama ni ladies unaambiwa ukishika if you touch your breast, you should try and feel if there is a lump. So that lump is a mass of abnormal cells that will have a type of growth which is uncontrolled. Normally, that growth should be controlled with the contact. Zikishikana hivi, it stops growing. Okay. So if cancer is not controlled, it will lead to severe illnesses, and in most cases, even death. Okay. And it can actually affect almost any part of the body. And it is a very significant public health challenge worldwide, not just Kenya or even Africa, worldwide. So let's look at the risk factors. What is it that can have you ukuwe na a higher risk ya kuugua cancer kuliko mtu mwingine kwa mfano? The first thing is genetic factor. So there are some mutations. Mutations are changes within the gene sequence. There are certain mutations that if they occur in our parents, they can be passed. We can inherit them from our parents. And some of these mutations will increase our risk for getting cancer. Okay. There are some mutations, for example, the genes have given the BRCA1 and BRCA2. They are linked to a higher risk for breast cancer and ovarian cancer. So which means there are some genetic factors such that if your parent has, for example, breast cancer, and any of these genes ipatikane kwamba mzazi wako ako nayo, if you inherit the genes, then you might not have cancer, but you stand a higher risk of getting cancer. So what do you do? Earlier screening. If you have a parent mwenye ako amesafa cancer, then know that it is proper if you undergo regular screening for you as a person. Because for cancer, ukijua mapema, just like HIV, then inaweza ikakuwa managed mapema. So still with the genetic factors, we have seen you can inherit some mutation. The other thing is family history. So if there is a family history of cancers, maybe people have got breast cancer, colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, then if many, 1, 2, or even 3 of your family members have suffered, then it could indicate that there is a higher risk that you possibly could also inherit. So that should prompt you to go for regular screening. Okay, you go for regular screening. Regular screening ni kukuambia tu wewe pia ni kama iko inakuja. So go in for treatment early. So the first risk factor are genetic factors where you can inherit a mutation or on the basis of family history. The second is lifestyle factors. There are some people who smoke. They use tobacco. Either ya kuvuta kama sigara ama ya kuchew. Wale wanaeka kwa mdomo ama wale wengine who sniff tobacco. So smoking or the use of tobacco is one of the leading causes of, the word is preventable cancer. So if smoking is leading to the development of preventable, then it means if you want to not to develop your cancer, don't use tobacco. Okay, don't use tobacco. The second factor of lifestyle factor is alcohol consumption. So there are some people who are heavy drinkers, regular drinkers. Such people will have a higher risk in the development of cancer, either cancer liver, throat, esophagus, breast. Why liver? Because liver deals with the detoxification. Liver deals with the detoxification. So when you give hiyo pombe unakunywa mingi kwa mwili yako, it is chemicals. So it is the liver that will be, itapewa hiyo kazi ya to break down the alcohol. So the more alcohol you put into your body, then the more work you subject your liver to. Okay. Then the diet and nutrition. If you use constantly diets that are very low in fiber, but high in processed or red meats. So processed ni canned meat, red meat ni ng'ombe, mbuzi, okay? So that can increase the risk of colorectal cancer, okay? But if you have diets that are rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, such diets will lower your risk of developing cancer. Okay. So it does not mean that when you eat red meat mingi or canned meat ama low in fiber, then you get cancer. No, it just increases the risk. Okay, it increases the risk. The other last factor in lifestyle is inactivity, physical inactivity. So you have a sedentary lifestyle, or if you are obese, then you are linked to several cancers. Okay, so it means if you want to reduce the risk of developing these cancers, then you have to do regular exercise and maintain weight which is healthy. When you do that, then those are important preventive measures. Okay, so that's about lifestyle. Sigara wachana nayo, pombe ikiwezekana wacha ama punguza. Okay, then diet, go in for diets which are rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains. That will help to lower your risk of cancer. Exercise more so that you maintain weight that is healthy. Okay, weight that is healthy. We'll discuss the aspect of weight more when we look at lifestyle diseases. Okay. The other factor is the environment and the occupation. So environmental and occupational factors. There are some environments where you'll be exposed to carcinogens. Carcinogens are the cancer-causing agents. So there are certain chemicals, for example, pesticides and other pollutants, which will cause cancer. So if, as a person, you are exposed to these chemicals, then you stand a higher risk of suffering from cancer. So there are people, for example, who are working in industries that are producing these chemicals. People who work in agricultural farms where they have to spray these chemicals as pesticides. Such people will be exposed more to these chemicals and they will lead to a higher chance that they can develop cancer. Then the radiation exposure. Labda umeenda hospitali ama warembo unaona we ni mweusi unataka kuwa mweupe, then unaambiwa ukidungwa hii shindano utakuwa mweupe ama ukimeza hii dawa utakuwa mweupe. What you are doing at the end of it, you will end up being exposed more to radiations. Okay, and when you are exposed to the UV radiations from the sun, then there is a higher risk that you will develop skin cancer. In the lab setups or even in hospitals, when you are going through ionizing radiation from either a medical equipment, umeambiwa enda fanya, waende waangalie kama mfupa imevunjika ama umetoka kwa ajali, so they have to put you through some radiation ndio waone ndani iko namna gani. If the person who is taking you through that imaging does not time properly, if they overexpose you, then you develop a higher risk of cancer. Then infections is the other factor. You have the HPV, human papilloma virus, is a major cause of cervical cancer. And cervical cancer is one of the most common types of cancers among Kenyan women. Okay. So HPV, or the human papilloma virus, is actually sexually transmitted. Okay. And because men don't have a cervix, because men do not have a cervix, it means men can only act as carriers. So mwanaume anaweza lala na wasichana wawili, watatu, wanne, aambukize wote hiyo HPV, lakini yeye mwenyewe ako nayo, lakini hawezi pata cervical cancer because he does not have a cervix. Okay, he does not have a cervix. The other bit is the hepatitis B and C viruses. Anytime you see hepat, that means the liver. So hepatitis is just inflammation of the liver. So hepatitis B and hepatitis C viruses, these are linked to cancer of the liver. Okay, cancer of the liver. Then people who have HIV, they have a higher risk of developing some type of cancers. For example, the Kaposi sarcoma. Okay, the non-Hodgkin lymphoma, largely because their immune system has been weakened. Okay, then there are some, the Helicobacter pylori. Hii ndio inasababisha watu wenye wako na ulcers. Helicobacter pylori is what causes ulcers, stomach ulcers. Okay. So it is largely found in areas with poor sanitation. And why it leads to cancer ni kwamba it is a normal flora, but ukitoa E. coli na vitu zingine kwa tumbo, then hii inatawala. And among the product of Helicobacter pylori ni kwamba someone wants to remote control my screen. Let me decline. Okay. So Helicobacter pylori, one of the products of its growth ni acid. It is that acid ndio ina cause hiyo vidonda ya tumbo because of the corrosion. Okay, because of the corrosion. So among the infections, you have the human papilloma virus, you have the hepatitis, you have Helicobacter, you have HIV. All this will lead to cancer. Then there is age and hormonal factors. As you grow older, your risk of cancers increases because now the ability of your body to repair itself weakens. Then as you also grow, the damage to the genes continues to accumulate. Okay, so as age increases, that's why you have most people who suffer from cancer ni wale wamekuwa wazee. I'm not saying all, but most. So as age increases, then you tend to increase the risk of developing cancer. Then hormonal factors. Hormones play a huge role in cancers. For example, the breast, ovarian, and prostate cancer. If you are exposed to estrogen, maybe there is a hormonal therapy you are undergoing, then that raises the risk for breast cancer. There is what we call age at menarche. You ask most of these ladies in class here, the age when they began having their menstruation flow. You realize that age, maybe walianza akiwa 10, 11. But if you ask people like our mothers, they will tell you they might have begun having their menstrual flow at 15 years. So what we know currently is the age when the menstruation flow begins among women is reducing. As that age reduces, it means this lady will be exposed more, okay, will be exposed more to hormones because her body will develop that ability to be a mother from a very early age. And we think that is one of the main reasons why now we have a lot of breast cancer cases compared, for example, to the people who are older than us. So how can one prevent cancer? Okay, so one, lifestyle changes, then vaccination and regular screenings. Among lifestyle changes, quit smoking, or if you don't smoke, then avoid secondhand smoke. What do I mean by secondhand smoke? You don't smoke, but you have friends who smoke. So you sit beside them wakivuta hiyo sigara. Whom do you think also breathes in the smoke? You are a beautiful girl, you don't drink, you don't smoke, but you are dating someone, your boyfriend smokes. Ikifika saa 6 ya usiku, anawasha sigara. Wewe pia uko kwa nyumba mmefunga. You are also smoking, but passively. Okay. So you have to avoid such exposures. The other thing, reduce alcohol intake. Maintain a balanced diet. Have a diet that is rich in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. I know it's difficult because unaambiwa sasa mbona ulisoma basi kama unakula tu sukuma, unakula. People associate kukula nyama na kusoma na kukuwa successful. Okay? But that just increases your risk ya to develop cancer. Then the last bit on lifestyle modification, regular exercise, so that you maintain what we call the healthy weight. Nikifunza, tukidiscuss mambo ya lifestyle diseases, munikumbushe the concept of healthy weight. I will explain it then. Then the second prevention mechanism is vaccination and early detection. Okay, vaccination and early detection. Currently, we have vaccination for the HPV that helps to prevent cervical cancer. I think they were giving it to adolescent girls. Okay, so you can go and be vaccinated. Importantly, again, for HPV, insist when you are getting intimate on using a condom, especially if you suspect that the man you are about to play sex with is not just yours alone. If you think you are sharing that man, insist on a condom. It's not just about, because mutapima HIV itakuwa negative, mutapima hiyo ugonjwa ingine, but hamutapima HPV. So you'll end up, my dear sister, you'll end up, sweetheart, utapata cervical cancer. That man is just a carrier. Yeye hana cervix. Okay. So insist, if you doubt, insist on a condom. Okay, insist on a condom. Then the hepatitis B, there is vaccination. Most importantly, go for regular screening, because when it is detected early, when cancer detection happens early enough, then treatment and management is possible. The last bit, public awareness and education. Very early on, one of my cousins, we suspect alikuwa na cancer, but because we were not so much aware, okay, what was explained to us, it ended up tukajua hii cancer. But in reality, with hindsight, I'm sure that was cancer. Okay, so we need to educate. We need to enlighten the community. Tuambie hii si uchawi. Okay? Hii si ati hii si laana, kuna ugonjwa inaitwa cancer. So ikikuwa namna hii ni cancer. Let's go and get tested. Then ikiwa hivi, this is the treatment. So that once we educate the public, once we make the public aware, once we make them aware, then they can now be able to go for the detection, kwenda kupimwa mapema. Then ikijulikana mapema na watu wamejua kwamba si uchawi, sio laana, ni ugonjwa, kutibiwa itawezekana. Management will be possible. Okay. I'll just quickly rush through the treatment. So one of it is treatment of cancer depends on the type, stage, and location. So there are some cases where surgery can be recommended. Hiyo ya kutoa to the tumor. Okay. For example, unaweza ambiwa ati mtu alitolewa matiti. Then at times you can use radiotherapy where there is a high energy radiation and it's targeted to the cancer cells so that they can be destroyed. Okay. With the chemo, so radiotherapy, you are using radiations to destroy the cancer cells. But with the chemotherapy, chemo is chemical therapy. So you are using drugs to kill the cancer cells. Okay, radiotherapy, you are using radiations to destroy the cancer cells. With the chemotherapy, you are using chemicals as a therapy. The chemicals are drugs. Okay. Targeted therapy and immunotherapy, you target just the cancer cells. You target the cancer cells. Okay, so it is a better way of treating, only that it is very, very, very expensive. Okay, it's very expensive and is not even common in low resource level communities. The last bit is palliative. Palliative, you now focus more on the quality of life. With the palliative, ni kuona ile cancer yenye iko advanced kabisa, which you can't treat. So you are just improving the quality of life, managing the patient because the disease is at an advanced stage. So how do you do with the palliative care? You're just managing the pain. You're just managing the emotions of that person. If that person was such a staunch Christian, you now bring in even pastors so that the care is holistic. Okay. So with the palliative care, ile dawa inapeanwa si ya kutibu cancer, ni ya kupunguza tu kama ni uchungu. So you just give a painkiller. You are there to cancel that person. You are there if the support, people are there even just to sing to that person. Presence. You bring in a pastor to preach, to encourage that person. Because when someone is recommended for palliative care, it means the disease is at a very advanced stage. Okay. So with the cancer, for treatment, ukiijua mapema inakuwa rahisi, lakini kama imeenda sana inakuwa ni ngumu. The main challenge with cancer, as I've heard from some of my friends who are medical doctors, ikianza haina uchungu, so you just feel kuna pahali tu kuna kitu inafura, very painless. That is the time to go and seek for help. Usingojee ati nitaanza kusikia uchungu kwanza. Okay? Huwa mnasema mapema ndio best. So for cancer, the earlier you go for the test, the better. And don't even wait for those screenings ati usikie mahali, hapana. Especially for ladies, let's make these screenings frequent screenings. Hata unaweza sema maybe utaenda twice a year. For example, for screening for breast cancer. Unaweza sema utaenda mwezi wa pili na uende mwezi wa 11 ama mwezi wa pili na mwezi wa 10. You just go in, because if it comes, ukijua mapema itakusaidia. Okay. I'll check again and see. Good. We are doing well. I will introduce the last discussion for today, which is about zoonotic diseases. That is the KUC1230 note 6. With the zoonotic, we call them zoonoses. Okay, so these are infectious diseases that are transmitted between animals and humans. Okay, so they happen to be diseases and infections that are naturally transmitted between vertebrate animals and human beings. The spread of these diseases can happen either through direct contact, consumption of contaminated food, water, or through vectors like mosquitoes and ticks. So there are some areas, either in Kenya or in Africa, where there is close interaction between livestock, wildlife, domestic animals, and people. In such areas, there is a very high risk for the transmission of these zoonotic diseases. Examples of such zoonotic diseases in Kenya ni kama rabies. Anytime unaumwa na umbwa, watu wanauliza na hiyo umbwa ilikuwa imedungwa sindano ya rabies. Okay. So rabies is caused by a rabies virus and is transmitted mainly either through bite or scratch from an infected animal. Such animals is either a dog or the wild dogs, the jackals. Okay. So for you as a human being, the symptoms for rabies, there will be fever, headache, confusion. Then there's what we call hydrophobia, the fear of water. Okay, the hydrophobia. By the time it gets to hydrophobia, mostly the rabies virus itakuwa imeingia kwa, most people would say watakuwa wanasema imeenda kwa ubongo, but itakuwa imeenda kwa central nervous system in the CNS. So hapo there's nothing you can do because hakuna ile dawa inaweza pelekwa huko. The method of delivery is very delicate and it will be very expensive. Okay. Because there are two places in the body of a man where blood doesn't go. We have the blood-brain barrier. Blood doesn't go into your brain directly. That's why unaona wanasema ati damu iliingia kwa akili akakufa in an accident. So blood doesn't go into your brains directly. Then as a man, there is the blood-testis barrier. Blood doesn't go into your testes directly. For women, it is the brain and the breast. Okay. For women, is the brain and the breast. For men, is the testis and the brain. Okay. The second, so the prevention for rabies, dog vaccination campaigns. Huwa unaona saa ingine wanakuja kuvaccinate hizo umbwa na hizo mashindano wanazidunga. You can even, for people who now keep, these days you find people keeping pets, kama umbwa, paka, nini, you vaccinate them. Okay, you vaccinate them. In the event kwamba umeumwa ama umekuwa scratched na umbwa ama na paka, the virus will be in the saliva. So you clean the wound promptly. The assumption is the virus will not have gotten into your body yet. That's why the prompt cleaning is important. Okay. Then now you have to seek medication immediately, the post-exposure. So you are looking for medication after exposure. That's why it's post-exposure prophylaxis. The other example of a zoonotic disease is brucellosis. I'm sure umeenda hospitalini, you feel like uko na malaria, uko na nini, unaambiwa hapana, uko na brucella. Okay, unaambiwa uko na brucella. So brucellosis is caused by a brucella bacteria. The transmission is either when the milk is unpasteurized, the meat is undercooked, or you've handled tissues of an animal which was infected by that Brucella bacteria. There are other examples, but I will jump that and just look at anthrax. So anthrax caused by the bacteria, the Bacillus anthracis. Transmission when you come in contact with infected animals, when you inhale spores or you consume meat that is contaminated. Okay. The prevention for anthrax, whenever there is a dead animal which you suspect labda ilikuwa na anthrax, usikule nyama, discard that carcass. Usikule. Then for livestock, let us vaccinate them against anthrax. So the zoonotic diseases, the diseases that can be transmitted from animals to human beings. What causes them? Okay, what causes them? So one, pathogens. These are microorganisms like viruses, like bacteria, like parasites. These are the ones which infect animals. And the same microorganisms can spill over to humans. We've seen examples of rabies. You must have heard of Ebola. Ile wanaongelea Uganda, wanaongelea Congo. And then very close at home in 2019, we had COVID. That is a pathogen which we think came from the bats. Okay. So those are viruses that can cause zoonotic diseases. Then we have bacteria, for example, the Salmonella, Bacillus anthracis, Brucella. All those can cause zoonotic diseases. Parasites, things like malaria or trypanosomiasis, the sleeping sickness. Okay, that is inapatikana kwa ng'ombe, inapatikana kwa binadamu, a zoonotic disease. So pathogens can cause this zoonotic disease. Another thing is the animal reservoir. So wild animals or livestock, even some domestic pets, can carry these pathogens without showing signs or symptoms. Unaweza kuwa na umbwa yenye iko na ugonjwa lakini hujui. Hiyo umbwa ikikulamba hivi inakuambukiza. Okay? If there is a rodent in the house, kuna panya, kuna nini kwa nyumba, hiyo panya inaweza kuwa iko na ile ugonjwa imebeba. So when it leaks a plate, it leaks a cup, then you use that or a spoon, it can easily now transmit the disease that it is carrying to you. Then livestock, we've seen brucellosis, we've seen many others that if they are not vaccinated, then they can transmit because they are reservoirs. Currently, there are environmental factors which can disrupt the ecosystem, alafu isongeshe binadamu na wanyama wakutane. Okay, one of the things is deforestation. When deforestation just means the destruction of forests. It is within the forests that most animals live, the wild animals. So when you destroy the forest, you've destroyed the habitat of those animals. So where will the animals go? They will have to move now closer to the human settlement. If these animals, these wild animals, which were living in the bush, harbor a particular disease, ukizisongesha karibu na binadamu, zitasonga na hiyo ugonjwa, zipeleke. Another thing is agricultural expansion. As the human population increases, two things also increase in tandem. Watu wakiwa wengi wanahitaji mahali ya kuishi na chakula ya kukula. Okay. So as they need more food, it means then areas where people now have to produce food from pia zitaendelea kuongezeka. Ndio sasa inafanya watu wanaanza kulima karibu na forest. Wengine wanaanza kuingia ndani ya forest. Okay. So when you do that, because of the agricultural expansion, then you are enhancing the contact between the people who go to the forest to farm and the wild animals that live in the forest. Okay. The aspect of climate change. When temperatures are changing in the environment, vector habitats, areas that the vectors were living are now expanding. So unapata mosquito pali haikukuwa kitambo, sahi iko. Okay. So some of these vectors, as they get into habitats where they initially were not, they are now getting in with the various diseases that they carry. So the people who are in those areas will now be exposed to a new disease that they initially did not have. Okay. Why? Because of climate change, which is an environmental factor. The other thing is human activities and behavior. So there are certain practices which can facilitate the transmission of zoonotic diseases. One of it is for the populations that do hunting and bush meat consumption. So when you are hunting, it means you go deep in the forest to hunt the wild animals. The same wild animals could be infected with some of those pathogens. So when you get in contact with them, utaua. So as you are busy handling the carcass of that animal, chances are high that you can be exposed to the pathogen. Poor sanitation and hygiene. If you don't adequately dispose the waste, if there is no safe water that we are using within the environment, such can lead to the spread of zoonotic pathogens within. Okay. Currently, we have the global transport and trade. Think of how COVID spread. It was just ilianzia China, but it eventually got to Kenya because of the global transport and trade. Had it been that people were not moving, then COVID would not have moved. Okay. Think of even HIV. HIV has moved the world over just because of the movement of people. Had it been that people were not moving, then HIV would just be where it was. Because it is the people who are infected, as they move, then they move around with the infection. So with the zoonotic diseases, the risk factors, what makes people to be at a higher risk, one is the occupation. So if you are someone who keeps livestock, if you are an animal handler, if you work in the butcher, in a slaughterhouse, you are likely to be exposed more with the animals. You come face to face with animals. So that increases the risk for you to contract the zoonotic disease. There are people who live in close proximity to animals and wildlife. In some rural areas, unapata watu wanakaa kando, yeah, a game park or a conservancy. Okay. So you have, for example, the pastoralist communities when you wanakuja in constant interaction with the animals. You have people who live in very close contact with the forests. Communities are just adjacent to a forest, to a wildlife conservancy. So these people come in contact with the wildlife. So it means if these wild animals have a particular pathogen, then these people will have a higher risk. That's why unaona Ebola inapatikana huko Congo, because huko ndio bado kuna forests kubwa. Okay, so that is the epicenter, because the people there live in close proximity to the animal reservoirs for Ebola. Okay. Then the cultural and dietary practices. If you are the culture of a particular community is bush hunting and consuming the meat, if that is their culture, then it will subject them to a higher risk. If their dietary practice is eating raw milk and undercooked meat, in places like most places where there are pastoralists, Turkana, Maasai, there are some parts of the animal which is eaten raw. Kuna damu ya ng'ombe, ya mbuzi inakunywa kama iko raw. Okay, so that is a dietary practice which exposes them to a higher risk of infection if at all that animal had the what? The zoonotic infection. The other risk factor is the environmental and climatic factor. So the climatic factors and the environmental factors, they will just lead in the changes in the ecosystem so that the animal and vector populations can change where they were previously living. Either they expand the regions where these animals live so that as the climate changes, the vector that was initially not there can now come in. Okay. In Kenya, wale watu wanatoka central places kutoka Naivasha, ukienda hivyo Nakuru, in Nakuru towards Nyeri, traditionally we didn't have malaria. Okay, there was no malaria there. So, but with the current climate change, tumeanza kupata, so kuna mosquitoes huko, but the mosquitoes which are found there are not the Anopheles. Unapata the culicines, the culex. The culex don't spread malaria. It's the Anopheles, especially now the female Anopheles, the one that spreads. So the environment there, the climate of that area could not support the Anopheles. The worrying thing ni kwamba sahi environment with the climate change, there have been indications kwamba Anopheles mosquitoes zimeanza kusurvive huko. Okay, which now means the range of these vectors has changed. So watu wa huko pia, they will now begin to suffer from malaria, which was traditionally not anything that could bother them. Okay. Then there is poverty and limited access to health care. So if you are dealing with the communities that are underserved, hazina proper health service provision, then such communities hazitapata vaccination against a particular zoonotic disease. For example, against brucella, against anthrax. They will not be able to access such. Just because most likely where they are living, the access, transport means ndio kufika hapo ni shida. Okay, so such can also be a risk factor. If you are dealing with preventing and controlling the zoonotic diseases, one is about public health education and community awareness. So you educate the community to change their behaviors. Once they know that handling wildlife, getting close to wildlife is dangerous, then they need to change that behavior. Wakijua kwamba kukula nyama yenye haijapikwa ni mbaya, kutumia maziwa ile yenye haijatengenezewa vizuri ni mbaya, they'll have to change. Okay? Then the awareness campaigns against some, for example, rabies. So people should know which symptoms, ukiona symptom gani ndio inaweza kuwa ni rabies. Then the importance of now vaccinating the pets that people keep. So if you have a dog, if you have any pet that you keep, get in touch with the veterinary people, they inform you which vaccination they have to undergo. Then we need to train the local health workers. The challenges of each local area are different. If you go to Mount Elgon, they will have a different challenge than if you went, for example, to Bumula, huko chini. So when you go to Bumula, you might find shida ya huko, maybe they have dogs in the village. But if you go to Mount Elgon, they have bats and they still have wild animals. So the health workers in Mount Elgon should be trained differently to equip them with the knowledge to recognize and deal with the local challenges. Then people at a different area should also be trained differently. Another thing is animal vaccination, which should be mass. So we can vaccinate our animals because they are the ones which will eventually give us zitatupatia hiyo ugonjwa. You realize currently unapata mtu anaishi kwa plot moja lakini bado amefuga ng'ombe. Sababu ya wizi, we end up now sleeping with these animals in the houses. So if that animal is not vaccinated, there are possibilities that some of the infections it carries, we stand a very high risk of being infected. Then let's manage the vectors. Okay, so if you are talking of mosquitoes, you are talking of ticks, let's control them. Let's deal with the environmental sanitation. Tutoe ile maji yenye itafanya umbu wakuje wakuwe wengi hapa. Okay. Then the other thing, food safety and hygiene practices. Okay, if you are dealing with meat, handle it safely. Dairy products, let's handle them safely. For most of these zoonotic diseases is about surveillance and early detection. The One Health approach system. For a zoonotic disease, wale watu wanatibu mifugo, the people of the environment, so the environmentalists, and the people who deal now with human health, all of them need to collaborate. We need to foster collaboration between the human health, the veterinary staff, wildlife trained sectors, and the environmental specialists, so that we monitor the disease patterns, both in animals, in humans, and in the environment. Okay, so when there's an outbreak, a rapid response team can now be established early so that it can move in, investigate, and contain that disease. Come up with policy and legislative measures. So enforce the zoonotic disease regulations. How do we move animals? Okay, let us delineate kwamba game park inaishia hapa, wanyama wenye wako nje, domestic animals should not get into the game park. Because when the domestic animals now get into the game park, or the wild animals get out of the game park, they come into contact. Then now they infect each other. Okay. So it's that contact that will eventually lead to us as the people who keep these animals also being infected. Okay, so the last thing I will want to deal with, to talk about the zoonotic component, is in the face of climate change. In the face of climate change, juzi mmesikia kuna mpox and many other diseases that we've not heard about for a long time. So what is the impact? What is the likely impact that climate change can have on most of these zoonoses? So with the climate change that we are currently experiencing, it is expected that the risk and spread of zoonotic diseases will increase. Okay. So as we are having a temperature rise, changes in the ecosystems, we think that that can easily lead or create conditions that are ideal for the transmission of these zoonotic diseases. COVID was such a zoonotic disease. Ebola is another one. Mpox is another one. Okay. So the current climate change fiasco is worsening this zoonosis in several ways. One, by shifting the animal habitats. So because of the change in the climate, wildlife tends to move to new areas because their natural habitats are changing. So as they are moving into a new area, they are bringing the diseases with them into closer contact with the people who are living in that new area. Okay. The second is the vector proliferation. With the temperatures, we know that globally, temperature imepanda by close to 2 degrees Celsius. As the temperatures get warmer, we tend to have an expanded range. So pahali penye vectors zilikuwa zinapatikana kama mosquitoes kama nini zimeongeza. I've talked about in central Kenya where mosquitoes were initially not there. But currently, we've now found the Anopheles mosquitoes there. So what has happened? The vector has proliferated, has expanded its range. Imeenda pahali penye haikukuwa kitambo. Okay. Then the extreme weather events. We had recent flooding and droughts. Uliona hiyo maji ilikuwa ikaua watu, ikaua mifugo, ikaharibu areas. What this does, when these extreme weather patterns have destroyed areas that wildlife was living in, hiyo wildlife itasonga karibu na binadamu. When these extreme weather events zinaharibu human settlements zitasonga karibu na wildlife. In the event of drought, in the event of flooding, there is always a very high death ya livestock. Then people will think that let's feed on the carcass. And it is in that event that now they end up getting infected with the diseases that the animals carried. Okay. So going forward, what we need to do so that we can mitigate, we can sort of prevent the occurrence of these zoonotic diseases in the future. Strengthening the One Health approach. One Health approach is bringing together human, animal, and environmental health sectors so that they can tackle diseases that are threatening us as from a united front. Okay, so you bring people who study human disease, animal disease, environmental patterns, weather patterns, wote pamoja, so that they can collaborate. Otherwise, watu wa binadamu wakideal na binadamu, wanyama na wanyama, and then environment nao peke yao, you end up tackling a common challenge, but from different points. But if you approach the common challenge from a united front, then you are likely to win. Okay. The second thing that we need to do is to do early, we do continuous surveillance and develop early warning systems. So if we continuously monitor, if we never had certain vectors within our area, then you realize all of a sudden there are now mosquitoes. That should give us a warning that because these mosquitoes have come in, they are likely to come in with the diseases that they are able to do what? To transmit to us. So it is that surveillance, is that early warning. When we realize that they are in, then we raise an alarm so that the required mechanisms to help can be put in place as early as possible. The third thing is community education and behavior change. So we need to educate people of the risks of getting close contact with animals. Then about the unsafe practices, either consuming bushmeat, okay, how that can lead to a reduction in disease transmission. So why is this a zoonotic thing very important? You might have realized that most of us these days, we don't keep dogs for security. There are people who keep dogs and they sleep with them in the house. There are people who keep cats not to eat rats in the house, but to be their pets. It can only get more. We'll just think of getting more people in the future keeping these animals in their houses. So that's why it's important for us to understand that the animals we keep are likely to be reservoirs of certain diseases. And as we get in closer contact with them, we are likely to be infected. Most of us, most of you want to finish university, then ama sahi uko hapo ukipewa help kidogo, umeanzisha nyumbani kufuga kuku, kufuga ng'ombe, kufanya nini. But these animals, at the end of the day, you literally sleep with them in the same house. So that enhanced close contact. And it is only but expected to increase because the size ya Kenya ni hiyo, but the human population is increasing. So what does that mean? The concentration ya watu inaendelea kukua high. So we will get closer and closer to animals. So what we need to do, we need to come up to understand, we need to educate people about the risks of getting this close to animals. Then the people who are exposing themselves more by consuming meat which is not checked or inspected need to be educated so that they can change that behavior. Wenye wanakunywa maziwa yenye ijaangaliwa, yenye ijapimwa,
Hello, class. The class is still on. Just some technical challenge. The connectivity. Lecturer is just joining shortly, so be a little bit patient as he reconnects.
Sorry, we had an issue with the net, but we had actually, we were just finalizing. So let's meet again on Monday. We'll continue with the lifestyle diseases, the ones that I sent. I think 1 or 2 more lectures, then we'll be done with the whole unit. So have a good week. Thank you.